the main issue that we're dealing with right now is production, sustainable production at a level that will actually be beneficial to the producer, at essentially profitability, that will actually be profitable to the various producers, and production at a level that would actually allow for adequate numbers of animals to be produced consistently to essentially match the demand. The demand fluctuates. It's especially high now for two reasons. One, season, Lent. We have a large Christian population, and essentially this entire period here we're going to be, there's a demand for fish, but that has also been hit by the fact that we had an oil spill back in November. So a lot of the consumers do not want wild caught fish because there's the concern that there is contamination and they would be essentially eating something that is hazardous to their health. So persons are kind of looking for farm raised fish, and we are essentially in a glut. We do not have the supply to meet that demand right now. So our big challenge is, and has always been, meeting the demand, but it's especially high now because of those two factors. Of course, Lent is a kind of recurring thing every year, but that oil spill is just this out of the blue kind of thing.
Situation.
Yeah, right. So that's our issue now. But in general, we typically have a challenge with meeting the demands of the public, especially when it means that our produce has to compete with imports. There are very, very cheap imports coming out of Asia, and it's difficult for local producers to compete with the fact that you can have a landed product from China that essentially is still way cheaper than what they would need to charge per pound of their produce to even break even. So a lot of that stems from feed costs, electricity costs to run facilities. So generally production costs as a whole are, for whatever reason, for various reasons, somewhat high.
Along those lines, you're talking about electricity prices and things like that. Are the producers also facing infrastructure problems, say water sources and things like that?
So a reliable source of water. So you're gonna essentially have people they have tanks, they have different storage areas that they would have on their properties, but it's limited. There's only so much they can have that's that's available to them. So essentially, yes, infrastructure is a challenge to some. We are trying to focus in part on subsistence farming as well, so that people could, even if you can't produce to feed the country, you can produce to feed yourself. So we're trying to afford persons the opportunity to kind of learn the basics that are required to just have some kind of, like I said, subsistence level farming, backyard farming.
So you work at the University of West Indies, but do you consider yourself an extension veterinarian? Do you provide services to these tilapia farmers in that capacity?
Okay, in part, and the reason I say that is we do not really have an extension veterinary service officially. Extension services to farmers, that service is provided by the government, Fisheries Division of the Ministry of Food Production. So fisheries, they have an aquaculture officer, a senior aquaculture officer, and then they have a number of extension officers. and they go out to the various facilities and do what they do. When there are health issues, then they would refer it perhaps to me. It doesn't happen very often, because what would typically happen is people would hear about us, even though the extension officers do know about us, and in a way they're actually making use of the fact that our unit is there now at the School of Vet Med, and that we do have those services available, and they're making use of it more and more now. But that's recent.
Well, the program is recent there at UE.
It is.
So the extension services weren't used to having that option.
And in part because the extension service up to recently was one person, was one guy. So the development of the aquatic veterinary services and the expansion of the extension services at the Ministry of Food Production kind of happened at the same time. So there was this one guy, this one person who was going out there and doing the extension services, but there was previously no veterinary support. Right? So he would pretty much go out there, do whatever he can, and if there was a health problem, it may get fixed as well as it may not. He will do what he can in terms of advising, in terms of treat with this, but it's not because he's not a vet, he's just kind of going based on, well, it's probably a parasite, so let's try to use this, that kind of thing. Now we actually have, there we can actually do the diagnostics and we can actually treat specifically, or advise more appropriately on how particular management systems may actually be causing health issues, and then try to, make things, correct things before they get any worse, that sort of thing. So I said all that to say that essentially we have the extension officers there now, and now that we have actually expanded our unit as well, and we're able to do those diagnostic services, they are referring cases to us when there is a problem, and even more so because people know that we're there as well. Even outside of the use of the Ministry of Food Production's extension officers, they would call us and we'd say, okay, bring in what you have, bring in some samples, and we do what we have to do. So yes.
What are some of the common diseases that you see, and are you worried about any increase in diseases with the increase of production in the country?
Okay. Most commonly in food fish. Recently, I've been seeing a lot of clinical mycobacteriosis. That is it's in ornamental fish as well. I'm seeing it just generally across the board, but yes, included in the food fish population. So yes, mycobacteria is out there all the time, but I'm actually seeing clinical cases, and a lot of that has to do with just poor management on farms, animals being immunosuppressed. They're not necessarily getting, husbandry practices are just not what they ought to be. Biosecurity measures are not what they ought to be. So you have essentially easy introduction of organisms into systems.
So are you concerned with the increase of tilapia production that maybe stocking density may increase mycobacteriosis cases?
Stocking density not necessarily being the thing that will prompt the increase in mycobacteriosis, but my main concern is the fact that people are not aware of what are the proper biosecurity measures that should be taken.
Okay.
And even if they are aware, when the person is not there to kind of hold a big stick over them and say do the right thing, they take corners, and in doing so they put their own facility at risk. They put the animals at risk. So biosecurity, I think, is really the main key, and in understanding the importance of it. And unless their bottom line gets hit hard, they don't tend to take it very seriously. And that's in my opinion.